Hello everyone. As the Department of Arts, Culture and Sports, we are here with 60 points of questioning the questions. Today we will discuss the future of international conflicts. Professor Talha Köse with us. Hocam, thanks for accepting our invitation.
Welcome.
Dear students, thank you for your interest. If you have, you can ask your questions through chat section. I will read out them later, inshallah. Hocam.
Okay, so thank you everybody. So I'm hoping to have this session on campus as well, inshallah, anytime soon. So I know that we are heading to a new era, which we are not accustomed to. So everything in our lives are changing rapidly. So we are getting used to any form of life. We are usually stuck at home, trying to do our lectures. There's a drastic transformation in international economy. So decline in trade, unemployment is rising, uncertainty about the health situation. So these are some, dark sides of the things that we have been experiencing in the last couple of weeks. So it came from the Chinese side, in the Asian side, but we are experiencing today, and probably it will be spreading to other regions of the world. So we are having a very comprehensive challenge for the moment. So it started as a public health issue, but considering the possible impacts of this challenge, I think we will have a long-standing issue which may have a structural influence on world politics. So as the scholars of international relations or scholars of international economy, everybody is following the developments with regard to COVID-19 pandemic, and everybody is also concerned about this situation. Of course, every discipline makes their own calculations or assessments and predictions about the future. So some of those predictions may probably be, unrealistic in the future, considering what will happen next. But it seems that this problem will continue at least 2-3 more months, and a more likely scenario is to a little bit longer. So after the management of the health side of the story, we will be dealing with the economic side of the story, and also this will have a large-scale impact in world politics in the coming years. So we know that so some of the scholars of international economy, politicians argue that this is the largest economic turmoil since the Great Depression of 1930s. Even some argued that this is even larger than 1930s Great Depression era. So of course, all the economic crises, all the economic turmoils have significant political consequences, destabilizing the world politics and shifting the power balance between the main international actors. So we are assuming that, considering this huge problem and considering the current situation of world politics, where there is a lack of cooperation and common understanding between the major powers, I think this problem, this COVID-19 pandemic, will have a long legacy in world politics. So definitely there are some optimistic, pessimistic scenarios. However, in order to make this assessment, how this will affect the global conflicts, in general conflict styles, I think we have to go back to history and see the main trends, main currents of global conflicts. So I consider this COVID-19 pandemic as the most significant event in the post-World War II era. So in terms of its economic and political impacts, if you look at so we know that until the World War II, there was diplomatic competition. So we experienced some turmoil in the Europe, and there was an era in between two world wars, which ended up a rise of fascism, authoritarianism, totalitarianism in Europe, and spread of hostile ideologies. Then World War II. So after the World War II, we have a relatively stable world order. I mean, stable means not necessarily lack of conflicts. There were definitely conflicts, but when we look at the situation in terms of the order, there was some security, especially in the West. So there was a balance between the Soviets and the Western blocs. So there was a rising prosperity, especially with the international trade, development, and post-war efforts, Marshall Plan. There was a rising and booming economies in the West and other parts of the world. So if we look at the situation, so there was a security on the basis of balance of powers, there was prosperity, and there was some functioning international institutions. But the basis of the security was the nuclear balance, so that the actors wouldn't hurt each other. There was a mutually assured destruction. So we don't see really major conflicts between the states in this period. So from 1945 to 1990s, there was a balance. So we shifted to 1990s, where the end of the Cold War and rise of the American hegemony in world politics, which was a liberal moment in world politics, which we see rising democratization, rising globalization and international trade, increasing influence of international trade, democracy and democratization trend. So which was positive from the Western side, but declining influence of the Russia, and also China also benefited from this prosperity and globalization. They increased their manufacturing capacity drastically. However, there was an American hegemony, so there is a unipolar moment until the 9/11 attacks. If we look at the 9/11 attacks, I think that was a huge distraction in the global order, global politics. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, the world focused on the fight against terrorism. Actually, the conceptualization of the global war on terror destabilized many regions, including our neighboring Middle East, Central, some parts of the Asia. And so this was a distraction. So rising American expansionism in terms of the military, destabilization and the weak states. So that was the spread of and increasing civil wars in the neighboring regions. And this military expansion and disagreements between the major powers led to triggering of the 2008 global economic crisis. Despite all these disagreements between Russia, US, European actors, all these actors actually, so 2008 global financial crisis was the most significant financial crisis or economic crisis since the 1930s Great Depression. But at that time, it was a financial crisis, and the world leaders managed to come together and establish the G20 mechanism and to find some common ground to address this problem. So, but there wasn't a big shift in the global production. However, all these developments, so the first, the 9/11 attacks, then the 2008 global financial crisis declined, reduced to significance and hegemony of the US and the West. So we have seen a trend, declining influence, declining power of the US and Europe in both world economy, world trade, as well as in the world politics. So there was a declining, balance in the side of China. So as you see, when we see the initial responses of the COVID-19 crisis pandemic, this is actually the continuation of the change that was triggered after the 2008 financial crisis. However, this accelerated the change drastically. So I think the process which started with the 2008 crisis will both expand and get accelerated. So what's happened at that time and what is the changing trends? We have to, I think, examine those. But coming to this era, I think there was stability in the West with the rising international trade and interconnection between the states. There was relative, cooperation. because of the balance of powers, there was lack of conflicts, interstate conflicts. And most conflicts at that time were experienced in peripheral zones of the world. So in Africa, there were civil wars, ethnic conflicts. In the Middle East, we have seen some civil wars, invasions, and also some Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific region, there were some minor conflicts, minor problems. So as you see, coming to today, the conflicts were mostly the feature of non-Western, or in general, they were experienced in the periphery of the world. And if you look at the center, usually rising economy, economic prosperity, international trade, including, I mean, this, which we can also include China, Japan, Korea, and even Russia integrated the world economy. So there were two stories. So on the one hand, there was also competition at the political level, but usually conflicts were experienced in the proxies, and some, Africa, Middle East, Central, and Southern America, and also Afghanistan, Pakistan region. We have seen those conflicts. So with, I think, this transformation, the major instabilities will probably come to the central regions of the world. So I think that's probably be one of the major transformations, because there is rising uncertainty in the world politics. So we don't really know that how the balance of powers will be shaped. So there's already rising influence, rising power of China. So there's a power transformation to China and Asia region. So this, I think this crisis will accelerate that process if it is not, responded. So there is already rising inequality in the world. So not just between different regions. So there was core periphery, but nowadays it is not just between different regions of the world. Within the prosper, developed world, there is an increasing economic inequality. So that's a major challenge. So some segments of the societies are not prospering, they cannot find job opportunities, and they are sidelined. So there's an increasing, urban poverty, which led to triggered some uprisings like the Yellow Vest and some in Germany, in many parts of the world. So the rising economic inequality, rising political polarization, and declining of the influence of the center parties. So now we have new right-wing and left-wing populist parties. Because of this economic inequality and political polarization, they are gaining more ground. So I think this process will, if it's not managed properly, this post-COVID-19 world, these center parties will be even weaker, and there will be a new set of anti-system or more radical parties. So which actually will shift the source of stability in the West. So there was corporatist agreement. So states provide certain services. The societies contributed to prosperity by contributing to the labor force, and the companies provided certain job opportunities and economic prosperities in the aftermath of the World War II. And this brought some stability in the Western world. So I think this formula, which brought some stability and prosperity to the Western context, so in the US, in the Europe, cannot provide the expected outcomes in the coming years. And there will even be a broader economic inequality and the political polarization, which may really decimate the major central actors. So the states cannot actually function, provide the basic expectations from the people. So health facilities, for instance, is very negatively affected from this COVID-19 crisis. Education is becoming more expensive and inaccessible, and many other public services are getting, much more worse in comparison to the earlier periods. So there is, and the Western economies are not performing well, and they have the rising older population, which makes their economies not as competitive as before. In order to be more competitive, they have to accept more immigrants, but they are also close to accepting immigrants. So that's where they are stuck. So as you see, there were already certain developments in a particular direction. I think this post-COVID-19 world, we will see further acceleration of these destabilizing transformations. So what is critical here is that, so there is rising unpredictability. So the order we get used to is changing, which brought stability. Rising uncertainty for both companies, for the states, and also rising, I think, competition for power will be the feature of the next period. So under these certainty, so I think the most difficult times and the most dangerous times are the periods of power transition. So there are probably certain actors like China that will challenge the status quo, and there will be status quo powers who would try to maintain their power. So and within this competition, this unpredictability may trigger some contentions in different zones. So I think this is the new situation. Unpredictability and the competition may trigger. So as we have seen, the conflicts usually until maybe 2010s were seen in the periphery, but those conflicts, especially the popular uprisings, protest movements, or anti-government movements, we can see those movements within the Western capitals. And as you also see that because of the uncertainty, many people in the United States are buying weapons, they are getting weapons, and they don't really trust the state mechanism. So this is also very dangerous because this may also trigger conflicts between the societies, between the people. So we are stuck in a period where we can not predict what's going to happen next. And the prospects for dealing with this contention, prospects for dealing with this uncertainty is not positive. So that's, the general picture. What makes this picture even worse is that there's a declining trust in the international institutions. So NATO, European Union, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization. So those organizations actually reduced uncertainty and led to cooperation between the actors. So declining legitimacy, declining performance of international institutions is a challenge. There's another issue, which is the decline of the international law, international agreements. So we seen that there was an Iran nuclear deal, but America avoided that, or trade deals have been transformed, or trans-Pacific trade agreements. So there is also resistance against those agreements and international law. I think this is also a significant development which can trigger further problems. There is also lack of leadership. So in the past, United States played significant role as world leader. So they wanted to maintain the liberal world order, but Trump administration wanted America first policy, which they don't really want to sponsor the stability. They say that so we are providing the stability and order, but other countries like China and Europeans are benefiting from this. They should rather, fund this, and we should focus on the prosperity and economic interest of the United States. So there's a lack of leadership, and also there is, rising expectations among Chinese leaders. There is some Russia is increasing, extending their influence. So there are some rising anti-status quo, politicians which may also trigger further tensions. So this is the picture. So there's uncertainty, there are already rising risks, and the mechanism which we try to contain those, deal with those risks are in decline. And this is probably gonna trigger certain conflicts within the core countries of the world economy and world politics.
Thank you, John. We can continue with questions. As you said, there are several predictions about post-COVID-19 period in the sense of international relations. Some theories assert that the current crisis will deepen because of the lack of solidarity between important global actors. On the other side, some analysts argue that humanity can overcome this problem. Shared human interest for survival will push governments to work cooperatively. What is your opinion about upcoming period?
I think if you look at the current situation and the current discourse, I don't really see signs of solidarity and signs of joint work, unfortunately. I mean, the only way to address those global scale conflicts is to bring broader solidarity, agreement, and joint work and sharing of the resources and knowledge in this phenomena. So for the moment, I mean, we see there's a tension between World Health Organization and the US. So there is also tension between European countries in the EU. Spain is expecting help from the NATO, but nobody is helping. So there is lack of sharing of information about this health struggle. And unfortunately, if you look at this picture and the transformation in the last couple of months, and also some European countries and US is accusing China within this crisis. They call it China virus. So I think and also Chinese authorities are not accepting this, and they are getting ready to file. They open some investigation about China. So if you look at this situation, I think the prospects for cooperation and cooperative addressing the crisis is very limited for the moment. But what will happen, I think we will have a broader understanding immediately when the health side of the crisis is settled. So if they find a vaccine, or if they manage to control the pandemic, then we will come to, so for the moment, because of the uncertainty, some leaders may be acting, aggressively, or acting, in an uncooperative way, especially in the democratically elected countries. There will be more pressure on the leaders. So, and in order to reduce the pressure on them, they may accuse some other actors. So what we will see in the coming months is that if they manage, if the world leaders or if the world countries can manage to control the pandemic, then how they will reach to redevelopment and restructuring. So that there may be alternative scenarios there. So, I mean, cooperation may bring stability more easily, more fastly. But the other alternative is isolationism. So each country may concentrate on their own affairs. They try to consolidate themselves. So some countries can manage to develop, return to the normal. Some others may not manage. So isolationism is not the panacea from this. And also the third and the worst scenario is quite, the competition between the actors. So within some actors may see the changing situation, changing balance of power as an opportunity for themselves to expand their influence, geopolitical and geoeconomic influence. So if they try to extend and if they use their power and opportunities against other countries, then we may have even more conflictual situation. So we have positive, negative, and even worst scenarios. But those scenarios will probably be discussed once this pandemic will be settled.
Thank you. Hocam, do we encounter with an Asia-centric world from now on? What do you think about American and Western markets future?
I think the Asia sent to argue that it's too early. You know, there is already, so economic transformation was happening in the last 20 years. It was accelerated even. Politically, China is, you know, gaining more power, trying to increase its power in world politics. However, you know, the Asia-centric world or Asian economies cannot be isolated from the rest of the world. So they become successful economic actors with the Western investments and with the, you know, manufacturing, producing for the Europe, for US, for other parts of the world. So there was actually, you know, mutual collaboration in this development. So of course, in the last couple of years, with especially with the Xi Jinping, China wanted to transform this economic influence into political influence. So that also brought some kind of tension. So what we see is that, yes, there is politically and economically, China and Korea and Japan are becoming more influential, but so far they didn't really face any challenge from the European and the American side. So I think it is vulnerable. So if they manage to collaborate, then continue, then this may reduce the tension. But the other alternative scenarios, probably from now on, American companies, European companies, other world companies will try to find alternative manufacturing opportunities in other parts of the world, and they would plan to manufacture in their countries. So this will reduce the trade and economic opportunities for China, and they can become more competitive politically as well. So because of the mutually you know, win-win kind of a situation, they didn't really resist you know, politically to America and the EU. But I think I mean, in terms of economy, their domestic markets are very important, but in order to become real power, I think it is crucial for them to do trade with the rest of the world. And I think if they cannot manage to find a common ground in terms of trade, manufacturing with the you know, Europe, US, other international actors, then we may not see Asia-centric world. So yes, they will probably be more powerful. Yes, they may probably be economically more prosperous and more their production within the overall world economy may be higher. But I think the collaboration serves better to their interests. So they have to make a choice whether politically, diplomatically, they would reflect more power, project more power, or just focus more on the economic side of the story. So I'm sure in the coming months, in the coming years, US, EU will be more reluctant to balance Chinese political influence. But within the West, within the Europe, some actors may be collaborating with China, with Japan, with Korea. So this may also change the balance. So I think that if transatlantic alliance keeps its economic and political consolidation in the coming months, coming years, they may balance China. But if they really cannot manage this, if they have their internal divisions, I think there may be a much faster power transition to China, power transition to Asia.
Thank you, Hocam. Can the current crisis empower authoritarian states if they manage the process efficiently? What about the tomorrows of liberal values and institutions in the following years?
Well, I mean, we see that democratic countries like France, United Kingdom, you know, US, Italy, Spain, are having more difficulty to deal with this pandemic. So mainly their societies are open, their economies are open, and they cannot have complete control over the individuals. So yes, they are less efficient in comparison to other countries like China, However, I think the alternative of the liberal democracies, liberalism, is not the authoritarianism. China is a very specific example. I mean, the government can have large control on people with the, with their laws, regulations, cyber tracking instruments and softwares. I think we should mention also more technocratic states. So like in between authoritarian, but technocratic states like Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. I think they are more successful in comparison to authoritarian states. So like the Iran or China. So they leave more space for people's autonomy in comparison to authoritarian states. And also they are more efficient with dealing with these kind of challenges. So rather than, yes, people will continue to criticize liberal states, and people will really question why the state cannot provide the expected resources and why it is not efficient in terms of providing health services and dealing with problems. So we may see a stronger role for the state, rather than economic actors and civil society in the coming years, coming months. But I think the transition may be in the path towards technocratic governments, technocratic approach, but this will also reduce the space for the politics in the West. So I think there will be a competition. Authoritarian option is not necessarily the best, probably is the best option, because most authoritarian states are exceptional states, but by using their example, for instance, in Hungary, in some places, they will mimic the policies of the authoritarian states. But I think some technocratic policies may be the part of liberal governments. So I think there will be more space for state, more space for political actors, and there will be also more expectation from the states and state control.
Okay. In your column at Daily Sabah, you said rapid normalization of China may give a huge global competitive advantage. According to this speculation, it may use to help the recovery efforts of the other international actors. In a sense, this may be a new Marshall Plan. What do you mean by that? Could you clarify the matter for us?
Sure. I mean, if we remember post-World War II order, so America was the largest manufacturing power with its economic sophistication and capacities and scientific background, and they weren't affected as much as the Europeans from the war and from in comparison to China and Russia. So what happened, rather than using this advantage, the US wanted to help European economies to recover, to make sure it has a market in Europe, in the rest of the world, and to expand the liberal democracies and expand its influence over the rest of the world. So United States, if it focuses just its internal affairs, I think its prosperity, its influence would be much limited. So in the aftermath of the World War II, also US played significant role to reshape the world politics because of this Marshall Plan, because of the policies, that active policies of internationalism, support for the international institutions. So it played a significant role. So yes, for the moment, China has some advantages. So, and if China really helps recovery efforts in Europe, in US, in other parts of the world, especially in the Asian region, then they may find new markets, or they may not lose their market share in the manufacturing. So this may be a win-win scenario, but we don't know exactly how China may continue its economic power, economic success, if the other economies are really negatively affected or even distracted from this COVID-19 crisis. So if China wants to expand its market, its production, I think it should also help other actors to recover fast. So this may be a very positive, side of the story. But what will China expect in return? Of course, United States expected expansion of the democracies, liberal order, respect for the international institutions. That was the expectation. And also with the expansion of the NATO, it was a broader mechanism. So yes, I mean, China may also help the recovery of the other economies. That may be a decision, but what will China expect in return? So that's the major question. So I think the only way to reduce deep competition or aggressive competition for China, or to settle the pressure on it. So because the COVID-19 crisis came from China, lots of people accuse China not being transparent and also using this pandemic for its own interest. I think China can play constructive role in providing development aid, development, credits, and also, restructuring policies. So that may be an option, which will definitely have positive political consequences for China as well.
Mm-hmm. Within this period, we face with the failure of the European Union. Serbian president said that European solidarity doesn't exist. That was a fairy tale on paper. What is your estimation about the European Union?
Yeah, I mean, European Union, it's, European Union played significant role in the economic development, prosperity of many European countries, and also provide a space, political space for the expansion of liberal democracies within the Europe. So in terms of providing economic prosperity, in terms of expanding certain values, norms, institutions, it was successful. But I think the US played significant role in the success of EU as well, because the European security was mainly protected by US. And also international institutions play significant role in the economic prosperity of EU. So in the first crisis where US and EU fall apart, it's the large scale problem like this. They really failed to cooperate, failed to provide resources, failed to provide necessary aid to each other. I think that's a very dangerous situation, because international institutions and organizations are tested in these kind of times. So in times of an economic crisis, in times of a huge problem like this, if EU cannot provide the expected, help, aid to Spain, France, and even Italy and other countries, and if those aid comes from the other places, then I think those actors will not trust EU anymore. They will try to look for alternative counterparts, alternative collaborators, and this will reduce the significance and legitimacy of the European Union. So those organizations gain their legitimacy in their resources, in their cooperation efforts, in their solidarity. And we don't really see those elements in the recent crisis, which probably is the biggest crisis of the EU so far. I think not the Brexit, but the COVID-19 is the most significant crisis that the EU is facing so far. And I think this will really influence how the member states of EU will approach EU from now on. So they will probably try to find alternative collaborators, alternative allies like, China, Russia, others. So I think this will probably or they may face some polarizations internally. But having said that, this situation, there's also, because of their resources, because of their expertise, EU also have capabilities to restructure itself. So yes, I mean, Angela Merkel is not as powerful today as probably 10 years ago. However, there is also a problem in the leadership of the EU, but with a more successful, efficient leader, and with a more efficient cooperation and collaboration, EU may manage to overcome this thing. So far, we don't see this sign. So there is a possibility they have the capacity, but those capacity is not used. And this, if this continues in this way, I think this will probably reduce, the significance of the EU.
Thank you, Hocam. Turkey extensively uses its soft power through COVID-19 aids. We sent medical supplies to the countries in fight against the pandemic. Will this situation affect Turkey's position in a positive way at an international level?
Well, I think it will. I mean, as you know, until 2012, Turkey played significant constructive foreign policy in terms of expanding cooperation, in terms of trying to address certain international crises through mediation, conflict resolution, tried to expand its influence over other places by its cultural diplomacy. Unfortunately, for the last couple of years, especially in the aftermath of the July the 15th coup attempt, there was a deep rift between Turkey and its especially Western counterparts, Western allies. So we have been seeing a real challenge, real polarization, and real disagreement almost on all issues. And they keep accusing Turkey. They don't see the security risks Turkey has been facing. They don't really see Turkey's challenges. So I think there was a very negative trend in the last 5 years. And within this COVID-19 crisis, Turkey, with its state capacity, with its production capacity and willingness to help other nations, I think played a significant role changing this tendency, changing this trend, which is very significant. So without expecting much, Turkey really helped its NATO allies, its neighbors, and its former, the countries that it has ties. I think this is a very significant development. So in terms of in crisis times, what kind of role you play is a very important sign how this will play in the new era. So Turkey played very constructive roles, very cooperative roles in a crisis. Of course, Turkey may have its own, problems, economic issues. Despite all these limitations, I think they will start to see Turkey differently. United Kingdom, Italy, Spain. Turkey even sent medical aid to China at the height of the crisis in China. So all the countries were closing to their gates to China. Turkey decided to send medical aid. So that's very important. And also Turkey's medical, medical manufacturing capabilities are very important. So I think all these capacity, willingness to play constructive role will have a significant positive impact in the role Turkey will play in the coming years. And this may probably change the negative trend that we have been experiencing in the last 5 years.
Hocam, thank you. It was a very beneficial program for us. Again, dear participants, thank you for your interest. Hope to see you again in other events, inshallah.
We wish a peaceful, stable world. Inshallah, we will overcome this the cooperation, collaboration, and dealing with the necessities of the time will accelerate the process of normalization. So I'm hoping that we will really have a more, faster normalization and return to our normal life.
İnşallah. Thank you hocam.
Yeah.